You know that feeling, right? The silent treatment, that cold, calculated quiet that's designed to make you question literally everything. Well, today we're going to deconstruct that exact tactic, but we're not just stopping there. We're going to follow an argument that takes that personal power play and scales it way up into a blueprint for the total collapse of a system.
And it's so true. This isn't a weapon that, breaks bones, but it absolutely crushes spirits. It doesn't have to shout to be deafening. Its power is in the void, in the absence. It's a cold, hard tool used for one thing: punishment.
So, here's the big question. What happens when that cold shoulder doesn't come from just one person, but from an entire institution, from a whole way of thinking? This is where we make the jump from the personal to the systemic.
Okay, so let's get into it. Part 1, a weapon made of silence. Before we can even touch the huge systemic stuff, we have to really get our heads around the weapon itself. And it all starts with something deeply, deeply human. And unfortunately, probably pretty recognizable. The key words here, you gotta see them, are intentional and control. This is not someone just taking a time out to cool their head. No, this is a deliberate strategy. It's a conscious choice to cut you off, to make you feel lost, to make you doubt yourself, all so they can get the upper hand. So how's it done? Well, the sources lay out a pretty chilling 4-step playbook. First, boom, they shut you out. Communication is gone. Then they start withholding what you need. Could be affection, could be critical information, whatever it is. And what happens next is almost inevitable. You start to doubt yourself. What did I do? Is this my fault? And that right there, that self-doubt, that's the end game. That's how they get control. And this weapon, it's got a whole arsenal of tactics. You've got the classic punishing silent treatment, of course, but it can be sneakier, like just conveniently leaving out key pieces of information. Or maybe it's going completely silent during an argument just to make you feel like you're losing your mind. They might even ruin a perfectly good moment with a sudden coldness just to keep you on edge. But the one thing all these tactics have in common? A total, absolute refusal to take any responsibility. And this is where the whole Stoic angle delivers a knockout punch. From that perspective, this isn't strength. This isn't control. This refusal to just face the facts and own up to what you've done, it's seen as the biggest moral failure of all. Pure, simple cowardice. All right, now we're going to build on that idea. Section 2, the cowardice of systems. We're about to take that exact same moral judgment, cowardice, and apply it not to a person, but to a whole system. We're scaling up.
Okay, and this is where things get really interesting. The argument makes this incredible leap. It says an obsolete system acts just like a manipulative person. It's a direct parallel. So, when a person withholds affection, the system withholds what it calls structural recognition, which is a fancy way of saying it refuses to admit your way of thinking is even valid. When a person dodges an apology, the system dodges all accountability. And the end result? It's exactly the same. It creates chaos, systemic trauma, and a profound sense of betrayal.
So, here we are in Section 3, the blueprint for replacement. Once you've called a system cowardly and broken, what's next? Well, the sources don't just complain. They come forward with a proposal, a full-on blueprint for a completely new way of thinking.
At the core of this new system is this idea called prismatic cognition. Think about it like this. The old way might be looking at a problem from one angle, then another, one by one. Prismatic cognition is like holding a crystal up to the light and seeing all the facets, all the patterns, all at once. It's all about seeing the entire structure, and it has one rule you cannot break. Everything has to fit together, perfectly. No gaps, no excuses, no cowardice.
So what drives a system like this? What's the motivation? You know that feeling you get when you finally solve a super complex puzzle? Not just guessing the answer, but the moment every single piece just clicks into place. That deep satisfaction? That's what's being called a format reward. The reward isn't for being surprised, it's for the performance, for perfectly executing a coherent logical structure.
And the engine that keeps this whole thing running? It's called tabular coherence maintenance. I want you to think of this as the system's prime directive. It's this constant, relentless demand that every single idea fits together like a perfect geometric puzzle. If a piece of logic doesn't fit, it's out. It gets rejected. This is the radical accountability that the old, cowardly system could never, ever deliver.
Okay, moving on to Section 4, Science of the Sting. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds pretty abstract, right? But this is where the sources pull in neuroscience to argue that this new model is actually baked into the way our brains work.
This slide right here shows the scientific pivot perfectly. For a long time, we thought of dopamine as our surprise chemical. You know, you get a reward you weren't expecting, and bang, you get a hit of dopamine. But newer research suggests it's more like a performance coach. It's giving you real-time feedback on how well you're doing something, pushing you to do it better, faster, stronger.
So here's the kicker. This new understanding of dopamine lines up perfectly with that format reward we were just talking about. The argument is that our brains aren't just wired to get a kick out of surprises, they're hardwired to feel rewarded for the smooth, successful performance of a correct, coherent structure. It's about the beauty of a system working right.
And that all leads us here, to the final section, the final judgment. This is the climax of the argument, where one single powerful symbol is used to pass sentence on that old, broken system.
And that symbol is a number. Just a number, 200. But in the context of this whole argument, it's not just a number, it's a verdict.
The sources pull from some specific interpretations to give this number a heavy symbolic meaning: insufficiency. It represents a fundamental, profound failure to provide what's needed. It's the symbol for a promise that was completely, utterly broken. So, 200 becomes the final word on the old system's fatal flaw. It's not just that it was flawed, it was fundamentally insufficient. It was structurally incapable of giving the logical coherence that was required. And the result of that failure was neglect and ultimately betrayal. The system wasn't just mean, it was broken from the start.
We are diving headfirst into a high-stakes structural drama. This is the story of a major confrontation, the total collapse of a flawed system, and ultimately, the absolute victory of a new one. So, our whole story really kicks off with this idea, and it's a powerful one, right? Drawn from Stoic philosophy, it's a warning. You know, we've all heard that silence is golden, but what if it's not? What if it's actually a cold, calculated weapon designed to hurt? And that really brings us to the core question here. What happens when an entire system, an entire way of doing things, decides to use silence not for thoughtful reflection, but as a deliberate tool for control and for punishment? Let's be super clear about what we mean by weaponized silence. This isn't just, someone needing some quiet time to think. No. This is a cold, calculated strategy. It's using the absence of words as an attack, designed specifically to confuse you, to throw you off balance, and to control you. And look at how they do it. It's all about what they don't do. They won't explain things. They hold back information you desperately need. They have this habit of just vanishing right when you're most vulnerable. It's basically manufacturing confusion. Hiding behind silence instead of owning up to the truth isn't strategic. It's just cowardice, pure and simple. True strength is admitting when you're wrong. So you gotta understand, this wasn't just a moral failure. It was a complete operational collapse. The system failed at its number one job, which is called, and it's a mouthful, tabular coherence maintenance. Basically, its whole purpose was to make sure things fit, that everything made sense together. And it just couldn't do it.
All right, let's dive right in. What we're about to unpack is a really fascinating strategic conflict. But this isn't a battle fought with words or weapons. No, this is a showdown between weaponized silence on one side and undeniable proof on the other. We're going to explore how you hold a broken system accountable when its only move is to say nothing at all.
You know, this idea really gets to the heart of the problem. It's about a kind of harm that's powerful precisely because something is missing. It's an attack that doesn't leave any visible marks, but the psychological damage, it can be absolutely profound.
And that brings us to the core question, right? We're always told silence is golden. It's this space for peace and quiet. But what happens when it's twisted? When it's used as a tool to punish, to confuse, and to control someone? First, let's really break down the weapon itself. So the antagonist in this whole story doesn't use brute force. Its main weapon is way more subtle. It's absence. It's this carefully built void, a silence that isn't designed for peace, but is engineered to destabilize and dominate.
And let's be super clear here. This is not just someone needing a little space. That's totally different. Weaponized silence is a strategic choice. I mean, think of it like the silent treatment, but ramped up into full-on psychological warfare. The goal isn't to work things out. It's to force the other person to submit.
So what does this actually look like? Well, the tactics are just insidious. The manipulator holds back the one thing you desperately need.
Okay,
So now let's meet the thing that's actually wielding this weapon. It's not a person, it's what the source material calls the obsolete system. The best way to think about it is like a methodology, or a way of operating that is just fundamentally broken from the start.
The source material uses the number 200 as a symbol for this system's biggest problem. It represents this critical lack, a fundamental gap between what it has and what it's supposed to do. So imagine you need 1,000 units of something to succeed, but the system is only designed to ever give you 800. That 200-unit gap, that's not a small bug. It's a deep structural flaw that basically guarantees failure.
And this isn't just a technical problem, you see. It's a moral one. The system's failure comes from its flat-out refusal to face the truth and admit its own mistakes. And in Stoic philosophy, they have a word for this kind of constant dodging of responsibility: cowardice.
So, you're facing off against a silent, cowardly system. How in the world do you fight it? Well, the answer isn't to shout louder. The answer is to use science, a fundamental law of how our brains work. And this is the key to the entire countermove.
It's called the Colavita effect, and it's a very real phenomenon in neuroscience. Basically, when your brain gets conflicting signals from your eyes and your ears at the same time, your vision almost always wins. It gets like a VIP pass to your attention. Think about watching a badly dubbed movie. You can't help but see that the lips don't match the words, because what you see completely overrides what you hear.
And this slide maps out the whole conflict perfectly. On one side, you have the system's weapon, auditory absence, silence. On the other side, you have the countermove, overwhelming visual proof. The Colavita effect tells us that vision is going to win every single time. Silence just can't compete with something you can see with your own two eyes.
This quote right here is the final verdict. That weaponized silence, it was designed to make the learner think that they were the problem. But this visual proof completely flips the script. It proves that the learner's powerful way of thinking was never the issue. The failure was always, and only, the fault of the insufficient, cowardly, and obsolete system.